in your questionnaire, one of the specific things you mentioned that you'd like to do is to work with the county council members to change the 40-20-40 policy, which I think is similar. What specific initiatives do you want to take with the county council to change that policy? What can the mayor of Seattle do to accomplish changes to that?
And the 40-40-20 policy is a really sticky one because, folks, if you don't know it, the 40-40-20 policy says that all new bus service, 40% goes to East King County of new bus service, 40% of new bus service goes to South King, and 20% goes to Seattle. And there's a policy reason behind that, which is that historically Seattle had most of the service and South and King County wants to get more. But there's a political reason too, which is South and King County have 5 total members of the council and Seattle has 4. And by golly, they've got the vote, so they're going to get the new service. And that's not really a good answer to how we should dole out new service. And we'd have less of a problem with the 40-40-20 split if we weren't looking at 20% cuts in bus service next year. Because that's going to mean the elimination of lines to places. And the people in South King and East King County, have a point. They need at least a minimum level of service for those that don't own vehicles and need to get to work and jobs. And I support that. I think what a mayor can do is one, lobby for great bus service, just like our mayor lobbies for highways and for a tunnel, and lobbied for light rail. Let's lobby for great bus service and let's stand up for that. I think the other thing is that the city of Seattle has resources that it can bring to the table with King County in talking about how to equitably distribute bus service in the future. And our resources are, dollars. As I've said, we already spend a certain amount of year to buy service. The city of Seattle does. So does UW. They've bought more service too. The other asset we have is how our local streets are used. If we're prepared to really work cooperatively with Metro in making it efficient for Metro buses to get through town and from neighborhood to neighborhood, you can get more service without actually adding more buses just because the buses go faster. So I think we need to come to the table with Metro and say, look, we're prepared to work with you. I'm trying to identify new funding sources, maybe even including some of our own money, City of Seattle money if that's what it takes, and really work with Metro on how we use our rights of way. And I think if we come to the table with those things and start saying, well, what's the return to Seattle and how new service is divvied up, I think there's an opportunity for a much more productive working relationship than the one we have now.
You kind of answered my follow-up with the connection to roads, because obviously one of citizens' big complaints about Metro is, well, you're still stuck in traffic. And what are the other options if we don't want to be sitting in a bus on game day trying to go to West Seattle? So I appreciate that you addressed that potential partnership. Are you, obviously there's been a lot of talk about the snow debacle from last winter, and a lot of cross-planning between King County and City of Seattle with, what roads we would plow and therefore what buses. We could keep running those kinds of conversations. So are you kind of thinking that same concept only applied daily? How can we clear a lane at peak commuter hours, that sort of thing?
Yeah, we've done it. We've started to make this shift. Third Avenue's a good choice.
Yeah.
There's an HOV lane over the West Seattle Bridge, is another example. Near my neighborhood of Aurora, they have peak hour parking restrictions and all-day parking restrictions at a few choke points, and they added more service simultaneously. And when they did that, made that 358 more reliable and added more service, the ridership went up dramatically. So one of the things you hear is, well, people don't want to ride the bus because it's unpleasant. Well, I get that. It needs to be a hell of a lot better, but lots of people ride the bus and ridership is up 20% a year. So people do want to ride the bus. We just need to give them a higher quality service. The other place we look at where we've already given right of the way is out to West Seattle, Elliott and 15th. And, that's kind of controversial. To some people don't like it. So I think it's really important that as you can incrementally change. There's parking restrictions, there's traffic signal priority, then there's dedicated lanes at the peak hour, then maybe dedicated lanes all day in the right quarters. But if you're going to do that, you better make sure you have lots of buses running on it. There's a lane dedicated to buses. People in cars want to see lots of buses and they want to see the service. So that's what we have to do on the transit side to make it work.
One of your 3 major platform issues is education.
Yeah.
And you've kind of indicated that one of the last resort options would be that the mayor's office would take over
Right.
public schools, and some of the criticism has been that for that to happen, the schools have to be in the red, and then if that is the case, then it's the superintendent's office to do that. So that's, again, one of the, not the mayor's responsibility. Give us some insight. What would you actually do? I mean, it's great to say, hey, I want to support schools and make the world a nicer place, and I like sunshine and blue clouds. But,
And I do like sunshine and blue clouds. Blue skies and white clouds, yeah. So talk about
how are
this.
you gonna?
Well, first of all, I mean, it's almost as if the talk out there that schools are someone else's responsibility has been repeated so often by politicians that the public's come to believe it. But the question I'd ask is, if something's going wrong in our schools, who do you turn to fix it right now? I mean, what we do in this city is we just replace members of the school board every couple of years, but we have the same problems, and the problems are really significant. 37% of people that are high school senior age don't graduate from high school. Huge numbers of children in our city don't go to the public school system. And we have a rising youth violence problem. And schools are a part of that, but the communities are part of that. So what can a mayor do? Well, Norm Rice, a mayor of Seattle, held an education summit and called everyone together and said, what can the city do? And they started making a difference. They brought the Families and Education Levy. They brought in ways of getting people to work together to support not just the schools, but kids and families. That's been allowed to atrophy the last 8 years. And we have a mayor who's held himself distant from the success of the school system. And I think the reason he's done that, and the reason most elected officials do that, is because they view it as political trouble, and that they just can't win if they touch it. And I don't believe in that. If it's a problem, if Seattle residents care about schools, the mayor should care about schools. And that means we start by calling everyone together to say, what can we do? What are the resources we bring to bear to help the school district? And hearing ideas from people too. Then this idea of direct mayoral responsibility is a response to this idea that who do you hold responsible? And Obama's education secretary, Arne Duncan, has made this one of his highest priorities. He said, urban mayors should take direct responsibility for urban schools because that's the only way to focus resources on schools. So this is an idea that's being implemented in other places. It's working. It's having an effect. We're not exceptional here in Seattle. We should be looking at this. Now if we're going to get there, I think you made a really good point, Sean, that you don't just go in and say, now it's time for the mayor to be in charge. And that's why I say, first 2 years, let's talk about working together. But even having a mayor who makes schools a high priority, who shines a spotlight on the issue to the public, and asks the public to judge, how's the system working now? How can it work better? And start deciding, is there a better way to do this? And if we can make great progress without doing it, we don't have to do it. But if we're not making progress, and we haven't made progress for years, why would we stick with the same governance structure? So I would want to make that case to the public that there could be a better way. And if you can gain that public support, then I think you could go to the legislature and get change.
So just a couple follow-up questions, if you
Sure.
don't mind. One, I think the public is pretty clear that there's a problem.
Right.
I mean, that's, that doesn't seem to be fuzzy for anyone, that there's a problem with our public schools. And having a great meeting and getting everyone talking is great. But I guess I'd like to hear some specifics in that 2-year transition plan. What specifically would you like to impact? What specifically would you like to see as outcomes that would say to you, okay, I wouldn't need to take this over, or okay, we do need to step in?
Well, I think one would be the level of collaboration between the various people and agencies and groups that touch kids' lives. So the school district is one. Another one is the juvenile justice system. Another is the state DSHS, and child support. Another is substance abuse and mental health systems. And Seattle had a case management system in place a number of years ago, which tried to connect all of these folks and focused on at-risk kids. That's been allowed to atrophy. It's something King County is doing. So that would be one measure. If everybody who is in charge of, has a responsibility for kids' safety and health and preparedness for school was collaborating and working together would be one measure. And I think you could also look at measures of attendance rates and truancy. You could look at violence rates. How much resources is the school district putting into safety in schools instead of education, because the city isn't providing those resources. So I think there are things you can look at to see whether you're making progress, whether you have a plan that makes sense. And if you're making progress, then it's harder to make the case you need dramatic change. But if we're going to keep this path of not having an active collaboration between the folks, and I was mentioning government agencies as really enlisting community groups as well, and the people who are active, running community activities and the like, bringing them in as well, But again, if you're not going to see progress there, or a plan, or people really collaborating, then I think you have to start looking at a different structure. And if you're seeing that occurring, if you're seeing progress on some of these metrics, then I think you have to keep pushing down that pathway and see how far you can get.